Welcome to the Heart of Health Equity. My name is Ashlei Rodgers. I'm the host of the show. And today I have such an amazing guest that I'm so excited to have. It's Lupe Arreola, who is the Executive Director of Tenants Together. Lupe, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you. So my name's Lupe Arreola. I'm the Executive Director for Tenants Together. We're a tenant rights organization in California. And we're super excited to be here and to be working with health leads. So thank you so much for having us.
Of course, I'm so excited to have you here and tell your story and talk about your organization. Lupe asked all my guests this: what does health equity mean to you?
For me, health equity includes tenant rights. For me, health equity includes reproductive rights. Yeah. For me, health equity includes economic rights or economic equity and justice, environmental justice. Like all of these things contribute to your health, to creating a world where there is health equity.
Can you tell us a little bit about Tenants Together? What do you guys do?
Sure. Tenants Together is a statewide tenant rights organization. We work with over 50 organizations around the state to provide technical assistance. We do advocacy at the state level in terms of legislation, pushing for better tenant rights. And also, especially in the last couple of years, we started doing a lot more support around their tenant counseling programs. So we have our own hotline for tenants around the state, regardless of status or income. And so, but we're also helping local organizations develop their own hotlines and their own counseling programs. I was actually a volunteer for Tenants Together as a board member and as a hotline counselor for about almost 10 years before I became ED. So, and it's actually one of the parts I really like, actually, is talking to people. So, one of the things, so whenever people call in, it's a warm line. So people leave a message, we call them back and we let them know generally kind of what are their rights. The basic things we tell people is there is an eviction process in California that they have to follow, that the landlord has to follow. So many people think that just because the landlord tells them you have to leave, that is like an actual eviction notice, or like any kind of written notice is an eviction notice. And we're like, no, there are actually steps they have to follow. There are, language they have to cite. In many cases, there's a just cause they have to give in order to evict you. And also there's a court process they have to go through. And then after that is when the sheriff then can come and change the locks. So it's a whole process that people have a right to demand and have a right to stay in their home during that process. So we, at the very least, the first thing we try to do is really walk people back from that sense of I gotta fight or flight. I just gotta go. I just gotta go. We're like, hold on, just wait, right. Just step back for a minute. Know that these are the rights you have. This is the process to enforce those rights.
But it's also for people to know their rights to be able to fight the system. I think a lot of times people assume, and so from someone who is told that they're evicted, they can call your team, talk to them about the rights, figure out the steps and process, and be able. Do you work with them to liaison with their landlord as well, or is it something that they just have to do on their own?
So we do that. We don't do that ourselves. We do that in several ways. One is we have a whole set of sample letters on our website that people can use. They can download and kind of craft and with their own information on a lot of different issues that illegal rent increases, that they can then provide that in writing to their landlord as a way to communicate. Like, I am enforcing my rights. Here's how I'm doing that. Here's what your obligations are. And we find that, and it's always so good. We really tell people, just do it in writing, because that interpersonal engagement is really a way that kind of that psychological warfare does happen, is when they're at your door, they're calling you, they're stopping you in the hallway. They're not allowed to do any of those things, so it's like, you don't have to engage. You can actually just be like, here's a letter letting you know what my plans are, which is that I'm going to enforce my rights. The main thing that we try to do is, give the people the tools to be able to do that themselves, because you can. I think we're taught very much in a society that we cannot advocate for ourselves, or that somebody has to do it for somebody with more education or more credentials or more privilege has to do it for you. And it's like, no, actually, you have the ability and the power to do that for yourself, and you should.
Yeah, you like empower folks with the information. Knowledge is power. I feel like it's like the rainbow. The more you know.
Yeah, it's like knowledge is power. So part of the work that we're doing actually with health leads is helping us do that work. So this project that we have, this California Eviction Prevention Project, is where we're training 211 operators around the state to be able to give people even this basic information over the phone when they call saying that they have a housing problem, that they're being evicted, or even that they're like, can you tell me where to go? Where's the nearest shelter? Because I want to leave my house because my landlord's evicting me. You'd be surprised how many times people are just like, I'd rather go to a shelter than deal with my landlord.
What does your organization do to address the housing and health inequality in California? Because I know you guys do a lot of things, which you just mentioned, but what does that actually mean on the ground for those who are from marginalized and underserved communities?
So for us, it's one, again, ensuring that people can have a place to live, period. And two, ensuring that that place is habitable, it's safe, and it's sustainable, meaning that they'll be able to thrive there for a long time and not have it be detrimental to their families.
Got it. And I know you mentioned, which is something that we hear about slumlords, and you hear what, like, we hear about them, but if you haven't experienced one before, you don't know all the things that some families have to go through to just try to keep a roof over their heads and not trying to upset management. So can we talk about, you mentioned retaliation. What does that look like? Because some families, maybe that's the only place that they can afford to live. Maybe it's, if you're undocumented, you're afraid to like get housing in other places. What does that look like for some folks?
So that's actually a really interesting question, because growing up my family is from Mexico, but I was born here, and we're a big family living with other families in a very small apartment. And, there was roach infestation, there was like other habitability issues. And the way that manifested for us was that we couldn't really make any complaints, because the first thing that would be said was, well, you have so many people living there. So it was definitely like, this is somehow your fault. It doesn't have to do with the fact that we're doing the minimum possible to make the most profit, right? It has to do with the fact that you have a big family, and, and we can use that against you. Their landlords are happy to accept the rent. But once people start asking for, their basic rights, such as like not living in a mold infested apartment, they're like, oh, wait, well, you're living here with your family, like I can evict you for that because you have too many people.
I wanted to ask you about that, because a lot of times when people are thinking about housing, you're also talking about safe housing. And when you have mold or you have roach or rat infestation, that affects the health of those who are living there, especially children. Can you talk about those spaces?
Sure. So, I mean, I think that also applies to, overcrowded conditions, period. The impact of unsafe housing and uninhabitable housing on children is huge. I mean, not just from the physical health perspective of having mold, of having any kind of roach or rat or mouse infestations. I mean, those things have been proven to cause asthma, also potentially cause other type of long-term health problems. It's not just about the physical impacts of having an unsafe or having an a uninhabitable home, but it is definitely, I think, the long-term mental health impacts on children of not having a place where they can safely study, play, and just live and thrive. Those are the impacts that I think are not being seen as much when we're talking about issues of displacement. We're talking about issues of evictions, increasing rents. It's like, every time that happens, every time a family is evicted, like, it's not just that they're having to move, but they're having to pick up their entire community and their entire community connections, friends, schools, and they're having to move that somewhere else, and kids are having to start over again in a different place. And that also has an impact on them. So, I mean, for us, it's so much more than just the physical structure that you live in, but it is about what kind of environment are you creating, and are you sustaining, and are you supporting for the families and the people that live in these properties.
I agree. I don't think enough people are talking about the long-term effects, like the trauma that this is carrying as well. And I appreciate you being so honest and candid about your personal experience growing up when your family had multiple folks in a space, just because you guys were trying to like survive. Like everyone just trying to make rent, like, and everyone just trying to do it. And thankfully you're like sending the elevator back down and helping those who are in similar situations like you grew up. Can we talk about how can the average person help support those who are trying to unionize to be able to get better housing support or better like services in California? Because it's an expensive state. I personally used to live there, and I was still shocked how much I was paying in rent for like a small shoebox. Yeah, it's a whole different thing.
So it's funny that you asked that because, unions are not just for the workplace. Unions are also for the home. We recently just met with like a building of folks out in Brentwood, out here in Northern California, via Zoom, who are all, experiencing really horrible conditions. And so we're like, yeah, we'll talk to you about what are your rights. We'll talk to you about what can you do. One of the things you can do is create a tenants union, so you can all be able to negotiate together. And you could be able to, and that actually is one way to try to reduce the possibility of retaliation, because they're less likely to try to focus on everybody than they are on like one person, right?
Right. I have a question with that too. So I know we talked about a little bit about retaliation, but what have you heard about some of these larger corporations doing to these tenants when they realize like, oh, you guys are getting organized? Like what type of stuff has happened?
I could sit here all day actually and tell you about like horrible like methods that landlords have used to try to evict people who all they did was trying to stand up for their rights and trying to have a better home for themselves and their family that they pay for. You're paying that rent not just for the physical shoebox you live in, right? You're paying rent for services. You're paying rent to have repairs done, to have the place be safe. The issue of corporate landlords is huge, right? So right now, one of the biggest and most like common ways to build wealth is through property. And so you have a lot of these huge equity firms, and you have a lot of these huge like hedge funds putting a lot of that money into huge developments, into huge high rises, and are also buying up existing buildings and existing single family homes. The only goal here is to extract profit, right? It's not to provide a safe place to live. One of the worst parts for me, so I worked as a civil servant for the city of San Francisco for 10 years.
Right.
And, seeing that like my own pension funds can be invested into these kind of corporate, landlords and these corporate like hedge funds that are then going out and evicting working class people. For example, like Blackstone and Wedgwood, and they're some of the biggest single family home owners in the country, right? So this whole thing of like the American dream of owning your home and things like that is not possible for most people, not just because of the cost, but also because corporate landlords actually own millions of homes.
Gentrification is such a big issue across the country, but especially in cities like San Francisco, where you have like tech bros coming in and like taking over, and now folks can't afford to live in the city at all, and they have to move further and further out and have like 2+ hour commutes just to be able to work. So for Tenants Together, is there anything that y'all are doing to help those families to fight against gentrification, or is it a losing battle? Like, what does that look like right now?
I refuse to believe that it's a losing battle. I think gentrification has been going on, especially in a city like San Francisco, since the BART line was put in back in the 70s, right? So it's been an ever evolving battle, really. For us, one of the best ways to fight gentrification is one, rent control, and two, just cause, right? And because one of the biggest drivers of gentrification is the increase in housing prices in those areas. And if they're not limited, and also the ability to evict tenants, especially long-term tenants, without any reason, just because you just want to make more money. So gentrification is not just about, moving out people of color. It is also about moving out the working class. It is about, moving out the folks that work there, can't live there.
What can we do? Like, I mean, let's be honest, like our government system and our politicians are often in bed with corporations and those who have money. that's why change isn't created as fast as we would like. I know you listed a couple of things before, but like, this is really disturbing. I think the housing bubble should have like been an eye opener for a lot of people in 2008. Now I feel like it's going to happen. Something else is going to happen at some point because of COVID and people aren't working as much and are sick and whatever else, and the long-term effects of that. Is there something else we can do? Like, I feel helpless right now because I'm like, I'm not in California, but what can I do as a person who's in Texas to be able to help support these initiatives?
Well, that's the thing though, is that even I would say, especially because you're in Texas, like there are organizations in Texas that are doing this kind of work to try to fight displacement in Austin, for example. There are organizations in every state, just about every state in the country, and it's about every country actually, that are doing this work, because unfortunately, gentrification and displacement and housing inequality and health inequality is a global issue, right? And so, it's not just about, unfortunately, it is not just about like, how do we stop gentrification in San Francisco, which is important, for example, or in California, but it's like, how do we fight the forces that are actually causing that displacement? So whether it be corporate greed, right? So for me, that means, calling out the corporate landlords and, how do we, fighting for them to have to pay higher taxes, or it is about like, how do we make them accountable for like not doing repairs for all of their buildings, for example, and I think that there is a way that everybody can actually, whether you're a new resident or not, like I think there's some people who have moved to San Francisco and in the last few years and are like, oh, but I'm part of the problem. So like, what do I do? And you're just like, no, like you can actually be like, it's not about just being like, I'm part of the problem, I can't do anything. It's like, no, you can actually help be part of the change that actually keeps people housed here. And you can be part of the change that keeps other people from being evicted. A lot of our volunteers actually are people that have moved to San Francisco in the last few years for like a tech job or school or whatever. And, we're like, yes, please, like get involved, like know what's happening in your community, like know that you can actually be a driver for change, because to be honest, we're all part of the problem in some way. Right. I mean, like, again, if you buy Kellogg's, you're part of the problem, because like, I'm just saying, like,
I know,
or like you order
for a month, if that makes any difference.
like I was at the supermarket and I was at the market and I was like, oh, Kellogg's, I really want some Fruit Loops. But I can't.
That's how I thought about Chick-fil-A, and my sister was sad, but I was like, nope.
Yeah, it does feel really overwhelming and helpless to be like, oh my God, the world is on fire.
Yeah, there's so many things. There's so
right?
many things.
I'm gonna be honest with you. There have been days in the last couple of years, especially, that I've just been like, the world is on fire. I'm just gonna hide in a cave for a while and just call me when things get better. But I know that honestly, I don't have that choice. Like my family doesn't have that choice. Like my parents never had that choice. It is understanding just the depth of definitely of how bad things are, but it is also remembering that we do have like that power to be able to make changes, even if and we have the power to make them collectively, especially.
Right. Even if it's small, even if it's small changes, every small change makes a difference. In these spaces, when you have to be more diplomatic, you have the politicians who are like smiling for the camera, holding the babies and only doing the right thing when people are looking. But I know you in a way that I know you could probably like let people know what's going on in a way that like, look, like this is not okay because of XYZ, because you have all the receipts. But how are you having these conversations in a way that's without bleeding your own trauma and other people's trauma, to be able to convince them to say like, hey, like this needs to be a policy change?
So I know this might sound weird, but sometimes we call it like a charm offensive, I mean, not like in terms of like charm, but like in terms of like, so let me speak your language, shall we? Like
it's not code switching. It happens the best of
us. Totally. I mean, it's partly that. And unfortunately, sometimes it is like busting out my college degree or being like that I went to Cal or whatever, But seriously, it is also talking to them about how these things are systemic. It's not just about this one individual situation, or it's not just about this poor group of people that are suffering. And the fact that they actually do have the responsibility to their constituents to make those changes, because if their constituents are happy, then like that's their job, right? That's your job. Your job is to keep your constituents happy. And so if you're only caring about one sector of your constituents, then, you know, again, maybe like we're going through this whole farce of like, you're representative of all the people, but it's like, you do represent all the people. Like that's your job, you know?
All of them, not the ones that just look like you, or the ones who have the money.
Most of the people that are impacted in these ways, in terms of like bad conditions, in terms of their housing or evictions, retaliation, they're also the folks that create the most wealth for our country. You know, they're also the folks that are cleaning your bathrooms. They're the folks that are like taking care of your children. They're the folks that are serving your food. You know, it's like this matters because like they keep your world going. And the majority of working class people are tenants. Like that's just what it comes down to, you know? And so for me, it's really important to point out that it's like, look, like the way that our world is created right now, like people depend on labor. And so you should be treating labor right.
It's a true thing, but I just know like during the pandemic when essential workers were like doing like going to work and putting their lives at risk, we were all clapping and we're like, oh my God, thank you so much. You literally are putting yourself on the line. And then once like we got comfortable and we got some of the goods that we need or whatever, we all acted brand new and we're like, minimum wage, $15, absolutely not, kind of nonsense. Or like having like housing, wait, what? You can't afford housing, your fault, move away type vibe. And like, it's true. And I'm happy that you said that, because we have to humanize these things. Like every single person who's experiencing this, there are also people you interact with on a daily basis. And if you care about the person who's watching your child, you should also care about them and their children when they're at home and like how they're living. Like that's important.
And it's crazy that we have to remind each other about that. Like that's just crazy to me. Like, you know, I mean, not just during the pandemic, I feel like the pandemic has done one of the few things that has done that I'm like, okay, I'm glad that it did that, is definitely point out like the role of workers in like keeping everybody safe. Like the fact that you can get takeout from a restaurant, like that's because somebody is putting their life on the line going to work every day. It's like, no, it's like, you know, their life matters a lot too, you know? And so, yeah, it's just been like one of those things that I've just been thinking a lot of, that I feel like the pandemic has really made all of us reflect, whether we've listened or not, the whole other thing, but made all of us reflect on like what the role of labor is, and also how important it is to ensure that people have the conditions that they need and that are healthy to be able to go to work. But I also love that people have also been saying like, ya basta, like no más. Like, you know, people have been
over it.
people have been walking out and being like, you know what? Like, I know I help you make the wealth, and you're, especially in this moment when you should be doing everything to make sure that I'm okay, like you're doing the same trash you have been doing. So no, thank you. You know, and people have been calling this like a great resignation and all this other stuff. And I'm like, no, it's actually people saying, you want me to go to work and risk my life for $8 an hour, whatever it is, for 10 hours a day with no breaks, no sick time, or little breaks, no sick time. It's like, no, because you know what? Like I matter to me, and I don't want to do that. You know, I don't like, why aren't you seeing my value?
Know your worth, regardless of what job you do, know your worth. And I'm glad that people are, you know, I know it's a privilege also to be able to walk away, because some people have, you know, have to pay for their housing and have to pay for their children, and it's a privilege. But for those who are able to walk away and get better for themselves, I'm here for it. I also want to talk to you, as you know, you mentioned you're a boss, you are a boss. How are you practicing some form of self-care? Because you're constantly giving in these spaces, you're constantly fighting for other people. What are you doing for your own self to make sure that you are filling your cup when you're trying to serve other people?
That's a good question. Having the ability to be vulnerable, to be honest, for me is a way to refill my cup, because then I'm not having to be that like infallible person that like just has all the answers and is on all the time. Because I'm like, I'm not, I'm human. I think it was June Jordan, and people have debated over who this quote came from, but we're the ones that we've been waiting for. And to me, that's always, something that I end up saying a lot, and I tell myself a lot. I'm like, no, we don't, I don't need a savior. We don't need saviors. We need ourselves, and we need our community, and we need each other. Like, we're our own saviors. That's been like the lesson for me. That's been like, oh, like, if not us, then who? And it's going to be possibly someone that is not going to have maybe our best interest in mind.
Very true. And I have to say, you've been ready for a long time. And I'm glad you're in the space to be able to do this. I think as women, people of color, we constantly are like, am I good enough? I don't know. Should I do it? No, you've been ready, not to be religious, but like God has placed you in these positions so you can able to like help so many other people. And you have, like, you're literally, the decisions that you're making every day and the information that you're sharing with different people is literally saving their lives, because they are able to stay home. They have stability for their children. They are not having to be homeless and dealing with that and all the other issues with that, especially in the middle of a pandemic. I just want to say thank you, because you're doing the work that a lot of people will just walk away and say like, oh, I feel so bad, and then do nothing. And like, you're the one who's actually doing the work. And I want to make sure that everyone knows how to support you and how to support Tenants Together. And so if folks are interested in learning more about the health equity work that you're doing, how can they reach you? What's the best way to get to you?
It's our website, which is www.tenantstogether.org. We also have our donate link on there. You can also donate to us if you'd like.
You mentioned people can support Tenants Together by going to the website and pressing the donate button. If they want to volunteer, can they also do that online?
Yes, we have a link on our website. One of the tabs is how you can help and join us. And you can sign up to be a volunteer. And actually, you can live anywhere in California, or anywhere in the US really, and but definitely in California, and be a volunteer counselor.
And the volunteers can come from all walks of life. They don't necessarily have to be folks who have a legal background or housing background. They can just say, look, like, I want to make a difference. I want to help. And that's what they do.
We have folks that are, students. We have folks that are retirees. We have folks that, work in the service industry. We have folks from all walks of life.
Perfect. We'll make sure also click the link below. Thank you, Lupe. This is such an engaging conversation. I definitely feel smarter walking out than I did walking in. I know a lot now more about tenants' rights in California and also across the US. If you guys are interested in learning more about Tenants Together, definitely check out their website. And also, if you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe down below. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.